Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update from RAU'S IAS. Do not forget to subscribe to our Telegram channel for all the updates and materials.
Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper analysis from the perspective of civil services examination. Today we have taken up daily edition of The Hindu newspaper dated 7th of May 2022. The articles which we are going to take up today have been displayed on the screen, and let us now begin the discussion. The first article which we have taken for today's discussion appears as a column on page number 6. Overcoming differences. India's new push for stronger ties with Europe comes at a crucial time for both. So Prime Minister Narendra Modi ended his tour to Europe this week by dropping in on French President Emmanuel Macron, who was re-elected very recently, as you might have realized. And what was being looked at as a very casual and informal meeting turned out to be a comprehensive discussion on bilateral, regional and international issues. And this article on various occasions mentioned India-EU or India-European Union Free Trade Agreement, which has been suspended since 2013. And India and European Union nations are trying to arrive at a consensus so that a new free trade agreement can be immediately kicked off. Now, whenever we talk about free trade agreements, there are various issues which we should understand. It is important to understand them because it is a part of your syllabus under GS Paper 2, where the syllabus says bilateral, regional and global groupings and agreements involving India and or affecting India's interests. Now, European Union as a group of nations is one of the most industrially, technologically and economically evolved regions of the world. They have one of the highest per capita income as well as the expenditure. And so access to Europe's market is crucial to India's manufacturing and services growth. But that is later. First, we have to understand, why is there a need for free trade agreement? What is the basic difference between preferential trade agreement, free trade agreement, regional trade agreement, comprehensive economic partnership agreement, BTIA? What are these terms? How are they different from each other? And then, by the same time, with respect to a specific free trade agreement between India and the EU, it is also important for us to understand what are the various advantages which shall be reaped by both the sides and what are the areas of disagreement because of which we are not able to arrive at consensus. So let us now begin the discussion. Alright, so starting the discussion with the very basics about which most of the aspirants are confused as to what are free trade agreements. So put simply, free trade agreement is an agreement between two or more nations, establishing fair set of rules for both trade and commerce. And we will see how this trade and commerce can deal with goods, services or even with the investments. Now, these agreements are not like normal agreements between two countries. These agreements should be legally binding commitments as far as the 2 or 3 or whatever be the number of the parties entering into the agreement is concerned. It should be legally binding on all of them. Only then it would enable proper and fair trade and commerce between two or more countries. Now, once these countries enter into such an agreement, they promise each other to gradually and slowly provide preferential treatment to the goods and services from each other. And so one of the examples would be to reduce or eliminate various kinds of trade barriers. For example, the import duty or import quota or the number of items which can be imported in a country from another country. And so what happens when these two countries or two or more countries entered into a free trade agreement, they slowly and gradually keep on reducing these kinds of trade barriers. And generally there is a sequence which is followed in most cases. You start by first liberalizing the trade in goods, then you move on to the services and finally into the investments. And so when you have a level of commitment and the trust between 2 or 3 or more countries where you can talk about setting up of rules for investment, which means that you have already achieved the highest level of commitment. And so that is why generally the countries start by first liberalizing the trade of goods. So at the very basic level, even in the goods, the countries start by first either reducing or removing altogether import duties on a lot of products. And it is not important that these agreements should cover each and every goods exchange between the countries. They can start by liberalizing only one product, or they can start by 100 products, or even they can go to include all the products, but generally it is not extended to all the products. So they can start by first reducing the import duties on selected few items. So reduction of import duty is all about reduction of tariff barrier.
But then you have a lot of non-tariff barriers which are hindering the trade between the two nations. And so then countries focus on reduction of non-tariff barriers. And then finally, when they have done significantly on these two fronts, they move on to ease customs procedure, which is all about reducing the amount of time it takes to transact a good from one nation to another. For example, the two countries design or modify their port clearances procedure in such a way that when a country A, having signed an agreement with country B, sends their goods to the country B, B understands that they have FTA and they don't need any kind of clearance because we know what kind of procedure is being followed in A while export, and so at import there is no need for higher scrutiny, and so it will reduce the amount of time which will take for a product exported from A to reach into the domestic market of country B. So now you can clearly understand that how these three kinds of measures would go a long way in rapidly increasing the exchange of goods between two countries which sign an FTA. Once they have done this for goods, then they move on to the services where they make sure that there is an enhanced level of access which is being provided. And one of the best examples would be the recognition of the degree of India into B, so that the Indian people having a normal BTech from Indian universities and colleges can go to US and serve as software engineers there without reappearing for examination. And so that is the kind of difference you can see, that a lot of countries do not recognize a lot of services being provided in India, and that is why when they go to US they have to requalify their domestic examinations, whereas in some of the cases it is not true. And so this is where the services sector or the enhancement of access to services sector comes into play. After the liberalization of the service regime, they finally move on to the investment regimes where they design the rules so that they are able to protect investment from country A into country B and vice versa. These rules are designed so that no national government can make rules which adversely impact one another's investment into each other. Now moving on to the question which often baffles the aspirants, which is what are the differences between all these six terms? What is this PTA, FTA, RTA, SEPA, CISA and BTIA? And so you can clearly see that I have written three names above and three names below because they can be clearly demarcated from each other in two groups. The first group involves more traditional forms of agreements, which are preferential trade agreement, free trade agreement and regional trade agreements. All these three mostly are limited to the exchange of goods. They are the traditional form of agreements in which two or more nations have been associating each other. Whereas the three terms written below are more comprehensive in their approach, and hence the name comprehensive, because they are integrated packages not just covering goods but also services, intellectual property rights protection, also investment protection. So when you have two countries negotiating with each other in so many domains of trade and commerce, that is called a CECA, CEPA or BTIA, and which is what India and European Union are doing right now. So there is no clear-cut official designation from the government of India as to how these will vary, but when a name includes CECA or BTIA, you must understand that these two countries are negotiating not just for goods but also for access to each other's services, IPR protection and investment protection. Whereas when two countries think of negotiating whatever has been written in the first row, they're just talking, or their agreement is just limited to the access and exchange of goods. Now the basic question: two countries can trade normally, they can trade under the WTO regime, they can trade with each other even without WTO regime. So what advantages do these FTAs or these BTIAs or CECAs provide over the existing regime that the countries try to enter into such an agreement? There has to be some very solid reason for the nations to do an agreement. Now, first and foremost advantage of two countries signing a free trade agreement is that the members of an agreement gain benefit over non-members, and we are going to understand this with a very simple illustration. Let's say that this is a country A which has the domestic market, and then you have another country B, and A and B sign a free trade agreement among them, under which the A and B both decide to do away on exchange of or the trade of cars. So any car which is made in B and exported to A will attract 0% duty, and similar will be the case when a car is manufactured in A and goes to B, 0% duty. And so these are the only two countries under the FTA. And let's say that there is another country C, excellent manufacturer of cars, the best in the world, but has not entered into any such free trade agreement either with A or with B. And so, even though it produces the best and most efficient cars, it is exposed to the 20% import duty when it exports its cars to either B or A. So what this free trade agreement between A and B has done, that it has protected the domestic manufacturing of both A and B from much more superior and efficient industry of C through a simple reduction of tariffs. So this was the example which was just limited to the goods. What about services? And similarly, let's say that if A and B decide that they are going to recognize the professionals involved in accountancy, for example, the chartered accountants, and people involved in legal professional, for example, lawyers, of each other into each other's territory. And so, for example, a person graduating in legal stream, a lawyer in B, can go to A and practice in A's court. And similar is the case with A and B. And if they do that, you can understand that the professionals of A and B have much more advantage in each other's territories as compared to a person who could be the best person in the world, who could be the most intelligent, knowledgeable and skillful person in the world in that field, but still would not be allowed to practice as a lawyer in either A and B. And so you can see clearly that signing of free trade agreement provides huge advantage and benefits to the members over the non-members. So that is point one. Then comes the ease of negotiations. Now, what does this mean? Of course, there has to be ease of negotiations. Only then an agreement can come forward. But here we are talking with respect to the multinational or intergovernmental organizations, especially WTO. We know that there are two peculiar things or the traits with WTO which make it exceedingly difficult for the countries to arrive at a decision. First is the vast membership of WTO. And then the requirement that each and every country would have to be on board, that is, that decisions will be made on consensus. Even if one country or two countries do not agree out of 150, the decisions would not be made. And so that is the problem with the larger organizations. And so it provides a very, very advantageous situations for 3, 4, 5 countries in a region that they can negotiate their own rules and regulations and they can arrive at a consensus much sooner as compared to a platform as wide and large as WTO. Then third biggest advantage of free trade agreement is that it provides the quickest way to increase the market size. The national governments of the countries design a lot of policies, financial policies, fiscal policies, monetary policies to increase the size of their market. But the free trade agreements are the easiest way to do that. For example, a country A in isolation would have an economy of this size. Country B in isolation would have an economy of this size. But let's assume that if they sign a free trade agreement dealing with the exchange of the goods, which means that most of the goods, even if not most, but some of the goods can be exchanged freely between these two nations, would mean that as far as those chosen and selected goods are concerned, now the market size is this much, which is massive boost to both these countries' economy. And so that is why it is the quickest way to increase the market size. Then the next biggest advantage of free trade agreements are that they lock in reforms. And they lock in reforms in such a way that reversal on a particular economic policy or a set of policies become very, very difficult for national governments. And to make this point clear, you'll have to understand that political parties have an agenda because of which they try to capture the power. And a part of agenda also includes economic policy. So most national parties have some or the other idea about how they are going to carry on with the economics of the country. But the problem is that in a democratic setup, these political parties in power keep on changing. And so when a particular party initiates a kind of reform, which is appreciated not just globally but also domestically, which is thought of as beneficial to overall economy, could well be reversed by the next government in power. But if a country signs a free trade agreement, it would become very, very difficult for the oncoming governments to remove or reverse it simply because it is a legally binding agreement. When you sign an agreement between A and B, when two countries A and B sign an agreement, they promise each other for rest of the life or some 50 years, 30 years, 40 years that they are going to follow on what they have promised. If they have agreed that they are going to remove or reduce the import duty, they will do that and they cannot be unilaterally taken away, not without any impunity, and so that is why it locks in reforms for a longer time. Then of course it leads to enhancement of trade between two countries, which is the starting point which later on intensifies into increased diplomatic relations. And finally, signing more and more such agreements with the neighboring and other countries signals the openness or at least the intention of an economy to open up to the investors, which then opens the floodgate for foreign direct investment, because then only high net worth individuals, investors, they are confident enough that now this country is pursuing an agenda or is committing itself to follow rule based trading. And now if we invest in this particular country, our investment will not only safe, but it is also likely to grow. And so these are the main advantages to both the countries or the group of countries. And we know that in case of BTIA, the two negotiating parties are European Union and India. And so let us understand what are the benefits which shall be reaped by both European Union and India, both in terms of politics as well as in terms of economy. Now this is just to give you an idea so that you are in a condition to better appreciate such kind of agreements. So now these are the benefits which shall be reaped by both the countries if and only if they are able to conclude an agreement. If they are able to conclude an agreement, this would mean that this will be the first free trade agreement of European Union with a major emerging economy. And it will strengthen European Union's role in global trade governance. Because if they can arrive at consensus as far as trading is concerned with India, they can do so with many other countries. So basically they will reflect or they will bolster their credentials as trade partner if they are able to convince India on minimum common trading rules. If we talk about India, it will provide much needed boost to its Make in India policy. We know that India did not join RCEP. And so India is also looking for some large free trade agreement. And so it will give India a big boost, especially after RCEP setback. And if the agreement with EU is successful, it will support India's rise as a regional power. When we talk about economy, you need to appreciate that European Union is not only India's largest trading partner, it is also the largest source of investment as well as the biggest source of technology. And so, if we combine just these three factors, wouldn't it make sense for India and European Union to conclude a free trade agreement? Apart from that, India lacks free trade agreement with any of its top trading partners. For European Union, a successful agreement with India would mean an access to a market with more than 1.3 billion people with rising incomes, and it is going to minimize the impact of Brexit as much as possible. And so you can see that if India and European Union are able to conclude BTIA, it shall going to have both political as well economic connotations. But if everything is so simple as we have explained, why is that the two partner nations are negotiating such an agreement since so many years? And the answer to that is because there are vast areas of disagreements. All of us understand the convergences. We know that coming together is going to help both these nations. But even after such an understanding, if they are not able to conclude an agreement, which means that there has to be substantial grounds for disagreements. And now let us understand those grounds very, very clearly. But if I have to summarize in the beginning, these issues just not limit themselves to the goods trading, but they are also limited to the rules and regulations related to services, the India's foreign direct investment rules, the restrictive measures which India has adopted, and with respect to the data security rules of European Union. And so let us understand these issues one by one. Now, we have seen how the goods and the rules related to the goods trading form the basis of any free trade agreement going beyond into services and investments. And there are very significant divergence as far as the beliefs and the views of EU and India are concerned, mainly because India imposes massive tariffs on cars, on wines, and on dairy products, which will also engulf in itself European dairy. And you can see that how these 2 and 3 items are one of the biggest and most well-known goods which European countries exports. Whenever we see any high-end car, whether it is Audi, Mercedes, or even BMWs, all of them are taxed heavily in India when they cross Indian borders and enter into India. And this is one of the biggest points of disagreement with European Union. They want all these import duties to reduce significantly and preferably go away, which India does not agree to. And biggest complaint of European Union is the kind of asymmetry which the two nations have in their import duties. For example, the cars imported into India are levied around 60 and ranging up to 80% of the import duty if they are made in European Union. On the other hand, European Union imposes just a 6 to 10% import duty from cars imported from India or manufactured in India and imported into European Union. And so this is a big asymmetry. Similarly, on wines manufactured and packaged in European Union, India imposes around 60 to 70% of the import duty. So European Union wants equalization of these duties below the level of 10%. They say that we levy a duty of 10% and similarly you should. Whereas Indian government claims that the level of automobile manufacturing that they have and the quality they have, it cannot be equated with the low end or middle end cars which are being exported from India to the European Union. And apart from that, the recent emphasis of the government of India on Atmanirbhar Bharat has been clearly raised by European Union in last 2 to 3 meetings. European Union agencies are extremely concerned that under the garb of Atmanirbhar Bharat, the government of India is going to prioritize and be partial or act partially as far as the Indian companies are concerned. So the overall charge of European Union on India is that the Indian government acts extremely protectionist. It acts in a manner to protect the national or the domestic companies of India, which is not quite conducive to any kind of free trade agreement. So that is an issue number one. Let's now look into the another important aspect, which is the major issue number 2 is services sector. And let us first understand what are the Indian demands from European Union side. And they mainly deal with the IT professionals because let's admit it, that is the best service exports which we have, and that has yielded the kind of results no other sector has yielded in India so far in last 50 years. And so first, India wants liberalization of visa regime in European Union. Then apart from liberalization of visa regime, Indian government wants our IT professionals to stay temporarily without any terms and conditions in European Union and to be able to travel among different countries. But according to European Union, these two matters are dealt within by the national governments. And so, as far as negotiation of a trade agreement with European Union goes, these things cannot be dealt within with a single agreement. You will have to talk to each and every individual country if you want to sort out the work visas, the work permits and other things. Then as we know that European Union is actually a union of a lot of countries. And since there are a lot of countries, there are a lot of standards and qualifications in each of the fields, which India wants to be standardized. Because if there are more than 20 partners, there are more than 20 qualifications and standards which a single person has to satisfy individually. And so it ultimately results into as many paperworks and as many qualifications. But if all of them are combined into one single standard across European Union, it is going to help India or any other country for that matter which is entering into an agreement with EU a much more than it is doing now. So this is about Indian demands from EU side. Now what EU demands from India is that it wants to liberalize India's accountancy and legal services. Now currently in India, you can practice as a CA or you can practice as a lawyer if you have a degree from Indian recognized universities or Indian universities. But an Australian person or a German national having a degree in accountancy from there cannot come to India and practice as a CA. That is the current condition which Indian government has. And that is basically to provide some kind of protection to Indian nationals. But European Union government wants their accountancy and legal services companies to enter into Indian market with their own professionals, and because of which they are demanding liberalization of such streams in our country. So this was the second major challenge. The third major challenge deals with the restrictive measures which India and EU have adopted in the trade to each other. So these are the measures which have been adopted by India, which restrict the access to market as far as European companies are concerned. For example, access to IT sector and telecom industry. Because under these two sectors, the Indian government requires that any firm which is dealing within must be registered in India. And so that is one of the biggest problems. Similarly, as far as telecom sector goes, there is a requirement of mandatory in-country, that is within India, testing and licensing of each and every equipment, which becomes a major hurdle for European Union telecom companies if they want to enter into Indian market. Similarly, if we talk about European Union restrictions on Indian companies, we have one of the world's highest phytosanitary measures. So sanitary or phytosanitary measures are biosecurity measures which are applied to protect humans and animals and plant life, and European Union has one of the world's highest standards as far as sanitary measures are concerned, because of which a lot of Indian exports, for example mango, have been banned or were temporarily banned because they were found to contain some of the traces of pesticides or fertilizers or some other toxins which were not allowed in European Union, because of which Indian agriculture has suffered a lot. And so India wants these phytosanitary measures to be lowered down so that Indian agricultural exports do not face a lot of problem. So this was the matter number 3. Then moving on to the fourth biggest issue, which is about data security. Now EU categorizes India as data insecure country. And so this is one of the major hurdles as far as India-EU BTIA is concerned. Despite India amending IT Act 2000, the European Union nations are not convinced about the level of protection which is provided to the data in our country. And since India comes under such categorization, it is prohibitive for any European Union company to do any kind of trade or service exchange with India, which would require a flow of data of European Union nationals to India. And so what it basically does is that it prevents the flow of data from EU to India. So in essence, it means that no European Union based or headquartered company or registered company would ever open its backend or any kind of R&D in India, because it is prohibited in European Union laws. And finally, rules related to FDI. We know that a lot of these rules have changed, and Indian government has liberalized most of these sectors related to insurance, wholesale trade and single brand retail. But still, they are not at the level which is being demanded by European Union countries. And then finally, India's model BIT or Bilateral Investment Treaty. So India has recently proposed a bilateral investment treaty model agreement, and which has also created a lot of problems, and all of these have already been discussed in the DNS, as you can see on the screen. So if you want to understand what are the issues with current legislation which has been proposed for model BIT, you should go back and watch this DNS, because otherwise it is going to extend the length of this DNS and this particular discussion way too much longer. So I can hope that through this discussion, you can now easily understand what are FTAs or free trade agreements, what are the general sequences, what are the different nomenclatures, and what are the important distinctions between the two, why two countries enter into a free trade agreement, and what are the specific reasons for India and EU to enter into such an agreement, and what are the major hurdles or roadblocks still in the way of India-EU BTIA. Let us now move on to the next discussion.
The next news for discussion appears on page number 1. Centre Delhi row heads to Constitution Bench. So the Supreme Court on Friday referred to a Constitution Bench the battle between Centre and Arvind Kejriwal-led Delhi government for control over bureaucrats in capital. Now the control over Delhi, which is a union territory according to the Constitution of India, but with elected legislature and council of ministers headed by a chief minister, has always been a problematic legal issue, especially when it is headed by different parties in the centre in the union territory. Now, the 2018 judgment of the Supreme Court was very important in this matter. At least it temporarily settled the matter between Centre and Union Territory of Delhi, where a constitution bench had unanimously held that Lieutenant Governor of Delhi was bound by the aid and advice of popularly elected government headed by Chief Minister. At the same time, the 2018 judgment had made it clear that the powers of Centre and the Delhi government were collective and coextensive. And so 4 years down the line, these two parties are again fighting, and so this matter has again been referred to the Constitution Bench. And so in this discussion, we are going to understand the evolution of administration and its arrangement in Delhi through time. Then we are going to look at the constitutional provisions with respect to Delhi, and what did the judgment of the Supreme Court say in 2018, because of which Government of India brought an amendment to the Act in 2021, and what are the issues. Let's now begin the discussion. Okay, so Delhi as we know it today has not existed like this in terms of administration since the time of independence. Delhi became a Part C state, you know those categorizations of A, B, C and D, in 1950. Then in 1951, for a very brief period of time, Legislative Assembly was created with an elected CM. But that lasted only for 5 years, because all of us know that in 1956, States Reorganization Act reorganized the whole country, and in that process, Delhi became a union territory to be administered by an administrator who was appointed by President. And so, Delhi began to be directly administered by the central government.
And this continued for a very long time. Although some form of representative local government was provided to Delhi in 1966 in form of Delhi Administration Act 1966, which provided limited representative government through creation of metropolitan councils. That has continued even now. And so, finally, the current arrangement started in 1991 when 69th Constitutional Amendment Act, which was based upon Balakrishnan Committee report, again created representative form of government in Delhi through creation of Legislative Assembly and Council of Ministers to aid and advise the Lieutenant Governor. So what is the constitutional scheme of Delhi? We know that various parts of the Constitution of India deal with various aspects of administration of the country. So for example, Part 5 deals with the Union, Part 6 deals with the states, deals with the Union territories, and as you can see, Article 239AA, Article 239AA carries special provisions with respect to Delhi. And so, there should not be any particular doubt in your mind whether Delhi is a state or a union territory. Delhi is a union territory with legislative assembly and with elected council of members to aid and advise the lieutenant governor, just like Pondicherry. Whereas all other union territories do not have an elected council of minister headed by a chief minister, and they do not have a legislative assembly as well. So what are the provisions of Article 239AA, which was inserted through 69th Constitutional Amendment? So first and foremost, it granted special status to Delhi. Why was it special? Why is it called a special status? It is called a special status because despite being a union territory which is supposed to be directly administered by the central government, it was provided with legislative assembly and council of ministers. And just like legislative assemblies of all the states are empowered to make laws on state list matters and concurrent list matters, even the legislative assembly of Delhi was empowered to do so, except on three important matters: public order, police, and land. And this has been the root cause of the problem between the Delhi government and the central government. Because whenever a party comes to power in Delhi which is different from the party commanding the power in the central government, it always leads to conflict, because public order, police, and land are one of the key and important aspects of governance. If a state government does not have police under their hands or the land under their hands, they will not be able to fulfill a lot of needs of the local residents. And that is where, when the confrontation first emerged when the Aam Aadmi Party came into power in Delhi, they went to the Supreme Court and Supreme Court decided the matter. And Supreme Court came up with its judgment of Government of NCTD versus Union of India 2018, in which the Supreme Court first and foremost ruled that since Delhi was a union territory, all powers lay ultimately with the central government and not the elected government of Delhi. And so, it was a big boost to the claim by the central government, because after all, this is what central government had been saying past many years. But there were other aspects to the judgment as well, which is very relevant for us to be understood. So apart from reinstating the claim of the central government, Supreme Court observed many things, and it issued a form of principles in order to ensure the better governance and efficient administration of the Delhi. It said that Delhi government has powers in all matters except public order, police, and land. And so, the LG would be, or the Lieutenant Governor of Delhi would be bound by the aid and advice of Council of Ministers, just like all other governors, except on those matters which are mentioned in the public order, police, and land. So if the government comes up with some initiative in health and education, the Lieutenant Governor should have no problem and should usually approve that initiative. But if an initiative or a law deals with police or land, Legislative Assembly and Council of Ministers cannot do anything about it. But apart from this, the only exception to this rule is a proviso mentioned in Article 239AA, which allowed the LG to refer to the President any issue on which there was a difference of opinion with the Council of Ministers. In such a case, the LG would be bound by the President's decision. Now, this difference of opinion can be related to police, public order, and land, but they can be with respect to various matters, and this is where the main problem starts. Since the Lieutenant Governor can have issues in any of the fields under the matters of Legislative Assembly and Council of Ministers, he or she can refer any matter literally to President, which then ultimately will be decided by central government. And so this created a big problem. And so on all the matters where LG and Council of Ministers have differing opinion, neither LG nor COM can decide on their own, but that matter has to be referred to President. And so you can see that this particular judgment did not do anything exceptional to help solve this complicated situation. And that is why the Government of India came up with amendment to the GNCTD Act 1991, which is known as Amendment Act 2021. And government gave two very specific reasons to come up with these amendments. The government said that there was no structural mechanism within the 1991 Act to ensure time-bound implementation of the rules of the Act. And also, the law gives no clarity about what proposal or matters need to be taken up with the LG before issuing an order. And so there was a time that these two things needed to be clarified. And so this particular amendment brought two important changes to the Act. First, the amendment says that the term government in any law made by the Legislative Assembly shall mean LG. Whereas, if you remember the 2018 judgment of the Supreme Court, it said the LG would be bound by the aid and advice of Council of Ministers in matters that were not directly under the control of LG. And the second important change which the amendment has made is that LG's opinion shall be obtained before the government takes any executive action based on decision taken by the cabinet or any individual minister. So now the LG's opinion has been made must even before the decision has been arrived at, and all the references to the government would mean references to the LG. So indirectly, all the powers are now being transferred to the Lieutenant Governor of Delhi. And that is why the Delhi government has again challenged these amendments in the Supreme Court. Apart from this, there are two other important aspects as well. For example, under the Amended Act, Legislative Assembly shall not make rule to enable itself to its committees to consider the matters of day-to-day administration of the capital or conduct inquiries in relation to the administrative decisions. Any of the rule made in contravention of this provision shall be void. So the Legislative Assembly cannot make any rules, and that is a big problem when it comes to the normal functioning of the Legislative Assembly. And finally, the LG will not assent to and pass on to the President for consideration of any bill which incidentally covers any of the matter which falls outside the purview of the power conferred on the Legislative Assembly. Which means that if LG feels that any of the upcoming draft bill has potential to impact either public order or police or land directly or indirectly, he will not give assent to that particular bill. This has now been explicitly mentioned. So now this has created a lot of problems, and there are a lot of issues with the Act. First and foremost, centralization of the power in the central government. The Act favors vesting real powers in the nominated LG rather than in the representative government. Then it undermines the representative form of the government. LG, who will now be the government, is under no obligation to implement any law passed by the Assembly or carry out the directions of the House, as he or she is not responsible to the Assembly. Then it also goes against the much touted cooperative federalism principle of the central government. At the same time, it is also going to create a lot of roadblocks for the Delhi government. The elected government of Delhi will have to wait endlessly for the LG's opinion without being able to execute their decision. And hence there are high chances that the government could become dysfunctional in Delhi. And apart from all the facts, the Act has been passed in haste without being referred to select committees and without proper debate. The next news which we have taken has appeared on page number 8. Italy, India discuss Ukraine, energy and G20 cooperation. So the government of India continued its push for better ties with Europe as External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar met Italian Foreign Minister yesterday, where they discussed implementing the India-Italy strategic partnership on energy transition, which was announced when Prime Minister was in Italy last year for G20 meeting. At the same time, it is important for us to know that Italy had agreed to hold the G20 meeting in India. And as India needed some more time to prepare for summit in 2023, and this year's G20 meeting is going to be organized in Indonesia, where the members are sharply divided over inviting President Vladimir Putin. And so from the perspective of prelims examination, G20 group becomes very important. So what is exactly G20? It is a group of 20 nations which are different from all other remaining nations in terms that they are leading industrialized and emerging economies. India is of course one of the members, and we will soon see a map where you will see all the countries. Now, G20 is important. This group is important because its members account for 80% of the world GDP, 75% of global trade, and 60% of the population of the planet. They meet every year. They have met every year since 1999, and since 2008, every meeting has been attended by the head of the state and the government. Apart from that, a lower level meeting is also held, which is known as Sherpa meetings, which is attended by the ministers of each and every country, who carry out minute details and negotiations, which then is finalized when heads of the state meet. So how does G20 work? It works without a permanent secretariat. It does not have a permanent secretariat. Its agenda and activities are established by rotating presidencies in cooperation with the members. A troika, represented by the country that holds the presidency, the country which has just held the presidency, and the country which is going to hold the presidency, work together to ensure the continuity in the program and agenda of G20. So when it comes to the membership of G20, starting with North America, Canada, United States, and Mexico, all three countries are members of G20. In South America, there are two members, Brazil and Argentina. When it comes to Europe, UK, France, Italy, Turkey, and Germany are a part of G20. When it comes to Africa, only member is South Africa. When it comes to Middle East, only Saudi Arabia is a member. When it comes to Asia, you have China, India, and if you include Russia, then it is also a member. Japan, South Africa, Indonesia, and Australia are other members from Asia. And this is where the trouble begins. Most of the members do not agree to Russia participating in the upcoming G20 summit in Indonesia, because of which it is in news. So what was the highlight of the visit? The two ministers called for an immediate cessation of hostilities. They have decided to safeguard the international order based on UN Charter with special regard to respect of sovereignty and territorial integrity. They discussed implementing the India-Italy strategic partnership on energy transition, and Italy agreed to hold G20 meeting in India's place, which was a big relief for India. Now, when this Italy-India strategic partnership in energy transition, which was signed in 2021, has been mentioned in this news article twice, let's discuss that also. Both the countries have called to explore the cooperation in areas such as smart city, mobility, smart grids, electricity distribution and storage solutions, gas transportation, promoting natural gas as a bridge fuel, integrated waste management, and green energies, which include various kinds of new and renewable energies, for example, green hydrogen, CNG, LNG, biomethane, biorefinery, second generation bioethanol, castor oil, bio oil, and waste to fuel. Then it also calls for encouragement to Italian and Indian companies to develop joint projects in natural gas sector, technological innovation, and decarbonization of the economy. It intends to encourage joint investments of Indian and Italian companies and to share useful information and experiences. The next article which we have taken up has appeared on page number 9. Fertility rate falls further, obesity rises. And this is what is emerging from National Family Health Survey 5. So National Family Health Survey 5, which is the fifth in its series, is basically successive rounds of National Family Health Survey to provide reliable and comparable data relating to health and family welfare and other emerging areas in our country. NFHS 5 National Report lists progress from NFHS 4 to 5, which was conducted for a period of 2019 to 2021. So let's look at some of the other trends which are emerging from the fifth survey. So let's first try to understand NFHS. Apart from providing health status, it also provides data by socio-economic and other background characteristics, which are quite useful for policy formulation and effective program implementation. So as you can easily understand by the data, since it was conducted in an around 6.37 lakh sample households and from around 707 districts which are spread across all the states and union territories, you can understand that it is extremely large-scale, multi-round survey conducted in a representative sample of households throughout India. So one thing which you should notice over here is that it's very different from census. It's not a census, it's just a sample survey where not all households or not all individuals are accounted for, but just a representative population, which includes 6.37 lakh families. The survey provides state and national information on India's fertility, infant and child mortality, practice of family planning, material and child health, reproductive health, nutrition, anemia, utilization, and quality of health and family planning services. So it's not only important for prelims examination but also extremely important for mains as well. Because in the GS paper 2 you have a line in the syllabus which says issues related to health and education, schemes and policies pertaining to vulnerable sections of the society. Now if you have to write these answers, from where do you get the data? You get data from National Family Health Survey. So each NFHS stage has two goals. First is to provide essential data on health and family welfare needed by Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, and to provide information on important emerging health and family welfare issues. As far as the conducting agency is concerned, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India designated the International Institute of Population Sciences situated in Mumbai as the nodal agency. The funding for different rounds of NFHS has been provided by various global and international institutions like USAID, DFID, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, UNICEF, UNFPA, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, and Government of India. So the major observation is that barring 5 states, barring Bihar, Meghalaya, Uttar Pradesh, Jharkhand and Manipur, all the states in our country have reached 2.1 fertility rate, which is the replacement level. All those people who have read NCERT must understand what is replacement level. So if you're watching this video so far, please let us know in the comment section what you understand by fertility rate and replacement rate. And why is fertility rate of 2.1 is also known as replacement rate. Now India has been extremely concerned about institutional births, and it is heartening to know that it has increased from 79 to 89% across India, and in rural areas around 87% of the births were delivered in the institutions. And as all of us know that immunization is extremely crucial for good development of children, and 77% of children aged between 12 to 23 months were found to be fully immunized compared to 62% in the last survey. So you can see that clearly 15% of improvement over there. Now stunting and wasting has been an important concern for India's children, and so stunting among children under 5 years has marginally declined from 38 to 36%, and so there is not much improvement over there. When it comes to ability to take 3 important decisions by women, health, purchasing power and visit to relatives, it was about 80% in Ladakh and 99% in Nagaland. Women having a bank account or savings account has increased from 53% to 79%. At the national level, obesity has increased from 21 to 24% among women and 19 to 23% among men. So you can see that is also a cause of concern. But it is a matter of much more concern for few selected states. For example, Kerala, Andaman, Nicobar Islands, Lakshadweep, Chandigarh, Punjab, where more than a third women are overweight. And so you can clearly see that there are various areas where improvement is clearly visible. For example, institutional births, which is birth in an institutional like hospitals, has increased. Immunization rates have increased. Fertility rates have reduced except or barring 5 states where it has reached replacement level. So these 3 are good news areas. But there are various areas at the same time which are emerging as a cause for concern. For example, we would have expected stunting or malnutrition to have gone down much faster than what it is doing now. At the same time, obesity, especially in women, is increasing at a very rapid rate, which is a cause of concern. So you can clearly understand these are the 5 important takeaways from National Family Health Survey.